Welcome to the Duke of Word podcast. Today we have Oliver Dowson back on the show. Today we're talking about the future of business travel in the new world of Zoom. So Oliver has spent his 30-year career building a one-man business into a small multinational operation running across 13 different offices in 9 different countries. And he sold that business in 2014. But while he was building that company and that business, that means he was traveling quite a bit from the year 2000 to 2015. And he was away from home on average 200 nights out of the year. And he flew about 250,000 miles a year. And believe it or not, he's still traveling almost as much to date. So he's a true air warrior, and he knows quite a bit about business travel, and he's turned his experiences, at least he says his crazier experiences, into a new book called There's No Business Like International Business. We'll dive into Oliver's experience traveling and giving us some insights as to why or how relevant business travel can be today, specifically for some things that you may overlook in your business. Oliver, it's good to have you back, man.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we had our first podcast, I believe, maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, but so much has changed. Lots of different nuances, lots of different changes here. I want to keep it light. I want to have fun here with you because your book is not serious. It's fun.
It's supposed to be, because there is a lot of fun in business travel. I know people say business travel and they think it's all just going to boring meetings, but it's not.
Tell us a little about your experience with that. Tell me a little bit, because right now when I travel, I get on a plane, it's great, it's okay, it's not my favorite, but yeah, it's either to a boardroom, a meeting, some of it is fun, but just tell me a little bit more about how you've seen business travel in your 30 years doing a lot of this.
I think it depends upon what you mean by business travel. And I think I've been lucky. I think a lot of the business travel I've done hasn't been for the conventional idea. If you read about business travel in the media, everyone assumes that you just travel to have a meeting.
Yeah.
You go to actually sit in meetings and then you get in a plane and come home again, or get in a car and drive home again, whatever it might be. So it's just going to another place to do something that you would normally do in your own office. But that isn't how I see it. It's not how my business travel has evolved. I think there is that element of it, but even when it's just going and meeting people, it's so much better than doing it over Zoom. I wish we weren't a continent apart and we were actually face to face now, because you get more from being with somebody. It's the culture, it's the language, it's the little bits, it's the body language, it's the things you don't see. So there's a lot of fun in that, but I just love all of it. I love the travel. I love waiting around in airports. I use my time. I sit in airports and I watch people, and I get great joy from watching all kinds of people. When I get up in the plane, it's great to sort of look out the window. I always like to get a window seat and think how lucky I am being up there, 39,000 feet, watching the world go by underneath, thinking, this is my opportunity. I'm jetting off to see other people, see other places, eat different food. It's all good stuff.
It is a key piece of that. And I think there's something that you're hitting on that I think is pretty important for us to take away is as this evolves, and I do want to pick your brain about what stays on Zoom, what doesn't stay on Zoom, what stays in meetings, how they're evolving, because there's a shift happening. But even like let's say you're a coach consultant, or you are doing a training for a team, or you're bringing your leadership out, like it's no longer, I think you'll still have those hotels where you go there, you go to the boardrooms and whatever. But I feel like there is a shift happening where depending on your audience that you're working with, depending on the needs or the likes that team like that team actually enjoys as hobbies, there could be a mix of mixing that into the overarching presentations or the overarching coaching sessions, for example. Like if you have a group of people who love to go hiking, then maybe your destination is going to be somewhere where it's close to an airport, but also close to a hiking location or to the mountains, and maybe even doing part of I can be as bold as saying part of your seminar on the hike or at the top of the mountain or at the top of the hill. And I think that's something that is shifting, because it's no longer, like you mentioned, like one of the things that I personally have done, or that have been very intentional about is when we have a team retreat, they actually came here to San Diego, is like, how do I make sure that at the end of that 2-day intensive, we don't say, wow, we could have done this over Zoom. And
You've picked on a great example. If you can do things which actually have some sort of physical, practical involvement, then that's clearly not something you can do with Zoom. Let's get the Zoom out of the way straight away, because there really is a place for it. There's always been a place for video conferencing or audio conferencing ever since it was first invented. I was using video conferencing in 1992, really early days of it, when you actually had to go to a studio and the other person had to go to a studio in the other part of the world. And it was basically like doing TV. It was exactly the same as doing TV. So I've been doing it ever since. If you both work for big corporation and each other, and you are having a routine meeting, and every Monday morning you have to actually have a discussion about what's gone on the week before, what your plan is for the coming week, sure, you can do it. Why would you go somewhere to do it? You save the time, save the effort, each other, suddenly going to change your opinion of each other. You're not trying to sell anything, and you think whatever you like to think of your colleague. Nobody's going to care. Do that by Zoom. If, however, you are a salesman and you want to go and sell a product or a service, especially an intangible service, like to somebody who you haven't met before, or even somebody you have met before, but you don't have a close bond with, then you can't easily do that by Zoom. You might be able to do follow-ups, you might be able to answer questions and things like that, but actually the real nitty-gritty of the selling, the physical side, has to be done face to face.
yeah, and I think that's a stance, and I think that's that definitely there are counter arguments of being able to continue to do that through Zoom. But I think what you're getting at is to the actual relationship. Are we doing for a transaction that's one time, even though the deal size might be substantially large? But I'm more interested in creating a relationship instead of a transaction, and that relationship lasts not just a one-time deal, but like years down the road, increasing the lifetime value as opposed to just increasing the checkbook by 1 quarter or 1 month.
Absolutely. So, for example, in the first half of my book, I write about a trip I made around South America. I did like in 2 weeks, I managed to cover most of South America all the way around, which was I think, a feat of booking air travel apart from anything else. But I went to actually collect information from sites. They happen to belong to one of the world's biggest car manufacturers. And I went to car plants. It's, as an aside, first thing is, it's amazing seeing how you can actually go to 10 different plants building exactly the same vehicle in 10 different places, and yet they build it a different way. And if you're I wasn't part of the company wanting to understand what was the right way of building it, but that would have been an educational experience in itself.
Yeah.
I just needed to actually gather information for the project that we were trying to do as a company. And in the course of collecting that information, it wasn't just going there and reading meters or picking up pieces of paper. It was also bonding with creating a relationship with one or more people in each of those car plants, so that for years afterwards, we could actually just pick up the phone or send an email and know who was dealing with whom. And you were basically friends with somebody in Colombia or Brazil or Argentina or Venezuela. So that was something that just could never have been achieved any other way.
Yeah, there is that balance between building trust in the time spent with that person, and obviously being in person accelerates that instead of just being on Zooms or different calls and touch points. I remember I've had Brian Jackson. He's a sales trainer here in San Diego, and he was on the podcast, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago. But he also mentioned that right now, even in sales or just in that relationship building, the different methods or techniques, you either do cold email, cold dials, cold calls, or whatever. He also mentioned that just stopping by, driving up, stopping by, checking in. That is a bigger need right now because of what we've experienced of separation, silos, and just being hunkered down. And I think right now being able to the yearning of what we want community, we want connection, we want relationships. So I want to talk about the where you see not the future of the travel industry, but just the future of the use of leveraging business travel and how that's going to be evolving, because there is a time and a place, like you mentioned, for Zoom. There is a time and a place for the async. There is a time and a place where I can be on 5 different continents in less than 6 hours by computer, like we're doing this here. But where do you see the leverage points really come through when it comes to business travel? And how can we start using business travel in creating influence, creating relationship, and being more strategic about it, as opposed to, hey, we have our quarterly meeting, let's book a hotel?
You've got to plan things more effectively than that. You've got to have a reason for doing it. But I think it depends upon whether your business meetings or your business travel is geared to your own company or your own organization, or whether you're actually trying to work outside the organization. So sales, obviously outside the organization, they want to deal with people in other companies or other organizations because they want to sell what they do. Same applies in a way to engineers, to other sorts of service providers who have a client who happens to have lots of sites in lots of different places or has offices in other places, so they need to go. You've got two different approaches. The first, if you're all working towards the same end for the same organization, then hiking up a mountain together or doing those types of team building exercises. I have a holy horror of this thing, the expression team building exercises, thinking some of thinking of ones I had with an American company many years ago, but spent most of my working life working with or for American companies. They had some fairly crazy team building things. Mind you, the Brits did as well. So we went around firing paintballs at each other. It's difficult to know whether those things really build a team. I think you've got so many different people, and somebody comes up with an idea and it appeals to them. It doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody else in the same way. But doing something together, definitely working together, having a reason other than just sitting in a conference room. Sure, that is creating something, creating a reason to be together. I think that's a good thing. If you're traveling because you're traveling to another organization, you don't need that, because it is an event in itself. Meeting new people, having a reason to actually do something at somebody else's office or factory or whatever it might be, is the reason in itself. And you can build a relationship from there. It's an event. For me, walking around a car plant, looking at electricity meters was an event in itself. It sounds like the most boring thing on earth, but believe me, it wasn't at the time. It was actually, it created a purpose to actually spend several hours in the company of somebody with whom I needed to have a relationship for years afterwards.
And I think it's key too, and I think also I do want to dive into maybe a few cues or keys from the book itself, but I think it's going back to what you mentioned, is assessing really where are you in terms of the goals and the intention that you want to leverage travel, be able to create more influence or rapport with a key contact, a key relationship that you know that it's going to be there for the future, not just for a one-time deal or a quarter. And it's looking at the long-term game and being able to also understand where we are at in the world. And some people may be comfortable with travel, some people may not. But I think it's also a key to never forego the face-to-face interactions that can still occur and should still be happening regardless of time and place, just because humans at the end of the day are human, and the future of business will always be human. And that's
exactly.
Stands in itself. But I think the cool thing about reviewing your book too is being able to see different instances from your own life. And I know they're it's like you called it factual fiction or something. I forgot the term that you used, but I really appreciated that. Using experiences that you put into play for us to be able to reflect, like, okay, here was the intent. how can I reflect in my own business, my own career, my own life, and how we can actually, where these moments can show up. And oh, that's an interesting idea. We talked, like I have a mentor, former mentor, mentioned that one of the most proud moments he had was, it's not a big account, but he was talking to a prospect. They were interested, not so interested. He just flew out the next day, met with them, and then closed the deal because of the intent. So it's good to be able to see like different stories or narratives that happened for us to reflect, where can we plug this in our life? When does it make sense to look at? And I kind of want to pick from the book itself right now, maybe 2 or 3 examples that you thought were not only essential and important for you in terms of the relationship, but maybe even saved you a future headache or a future cost or an issue because you actually went out of the way to meet in person or understand the situation firsthand as opposed to secondhand reports.
Picking up on that last thing, in the second half of the book, there's actually a trek around Southeast Asia to China and Japan and Korea. Picking the Chinese element out of it, I went to China looking for a business partner and for people to work with. It's essentially, if you think from the viewpoint of outsourcing, sending work somewhere else, maybe owning it rather than actually giving it to another company to do, but actually seeing what it's like. And I went to Shanghai on this trip and saw 6 different companies, all of whom purported from a distance to be able to do them. My colleague at the time, a obstreperous Korean Japanese lady who is best described as can't do with can't, she researched everything very thoroughly and came up with these 6 companies that we should go see and who might be able to do our work. And in fact, I had a similar experience in India some years before. And it's amazing when you actually go and see something for yourself, how different it is to the way it's been described. So we went to this software house that was written up and shown as being some fabulous software house, the wonderful pictures, lots of experience of what they'd actually done and so forth. It turned out to be the back room of a hairdressing salon.
Wow.
With 3 very engaging, very good young punk Chinese programmers who seem to have got it entirely into their head that our only ambition in life was to actually copy or plagiarize American computer games. So they were actually, we're going to come and copy it. That was one. I went to another one that was like a Kafka experience, the Great Wall of Computer Company, I've just called them. The names have to be changed to protect the innocent or the guilty. And there it was like going into something could only have been described by Kafka. All these black suited men in gray cubes with green screens, all tapping away like it's something out of Kafka English. What so many different, that was 2 out of 6. Read the book and read the other 4, but to
assess your partners, I think that's key, right? To assess who you're deciding to do business with long term.
Yeah, and even if you're not trying to give somebody to business, there's so much in terms of partnership, and actually seeing the reality is so much different to what you read about, what you've been told, what the person tells you over a camera. We're looking at each other now. I don't know if you're in a very nicely arranged bedroom or in a master suite. I have no idea.
The master suite, but it's not a 77-story room in San Diego. Wow. Let me tell you, it's pretty nice, but
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. But you get what I mean.
And I think that's the key takeaway there too. And that's actually something that, like, right now, if you're listening to this, either you're doing business with a partner, and this is not a business partner. Let's say it's a strategic partner, someone who is doing your tech, someone who's going to be doing your outsourced work, someone's going to be doing your administrative assistance, or who's going to be doing your executive assistance, or even when you hire someone, obviously you do that hiring process and you meet with them. But I think this goes beyond that. This is looking for a longer term outside vendor. For example, like at least the example from here, when you have a long-term vendor that you're looking to work with, Right now, obviously, most businesses, I think there's like 1.2 million in the US, are home-based businesses. So you're not going to go to the home and judge them based off that. I think it's important though to know if I'm working with an entity or a vendor or a person who's going to be working with me to fulfill, let's say, for example, my software development for some internal things that I'm doing. And this is not a one-time thing. It's going to be maybe like a 3-year minimum relationship. It is worthwhile to see if the cost of the investment of this deal for me to pay them is going to be over 6 figures over the lifetime. It does make sense just to spend a couple thousand just to get coffee with them if they're local geographic, or at least within, at this case, the States. Get coffee with them. If you've narrowed down from 12 to like maybe 3 people, just meet them in person, maybe talk about like the goals and see if is this a good fit. I think that's the key takeaway, because does Zoom do that? Does Zoom allow for that to happen? Absolutely. But I think there's something more when it comes to a long-term strategic partner that you either want to work within your company or with your team. And I think that's where some of the value I'm seeing here of integrating business travel and doing it intentionally, not just because you got budget and you want to spend it.
Exactly. And that's exactly, and you've really got to see someone you're going to work with. And you mentioned accountants. I remember going on another project looking for an accountant in Dubai. The one that looked best on paper in the previous video calls we'd had with them turned out to actually be a room temporarily furnished with 3 desks and a few laptop computers. And they had no customers at all and were starting off, which might be fine. You might be happy with that, but you need to see it for yourself. I've got nothing against people working out of their back room. I think it's a great thing to do. And I think home business can be a wonderful thing, but it's not the same just dealing with somebody remotely. You've got to actually go see them.
Yeah, and it's matching. It's matching the needs of the business, right? Like if you can work with that startup, that's completely fine. Like I've done that in the past too.
Yeah.
But it's also, does that make sense if you're an operation of 50 people? Does it make sense to have that level of entry, or do you need to work someone who's got more experience because of the fact of the level of requirements that you have and the level of competency that's necessary? So I think there's all these factors that play an important role in it.
I agree. All of those things are essential. There's also a need for travel to actually physically see equipment, premises. Yeah. So you don't, many businesses rely even just on the fact that the other end has computer equipment, for example. But if you're dealing internationally, and most of my travel's been international, so I tended not to stay in one country. For me, the States is international, but over 30 years, I spent 200 days a year traveling, at least. So I'm up with the George Clooney's up in the air, except I can tell you that it's actually impossible to fly 7 million business miles in your lifetime. It's technically impossible because I worked it out, but 3 million, yes, so maybe with bonus miles. But
That's all good.
But the moment you're not dealing with your own country, with your own culture, it becomes even more essential. There's an element, I'm a Brit, you're American, both nationalities do have a trait of tending to believe that everybody else is a bit like them, and assuming how things will actually work. It's not the case. If it's a country, especially where it's one with a language that you're not familiar with, then you've really got to go and see it. You've got to go and see the premises, you've got to go and see the people in it, because otherwise you're just not going to get the feedback. You're not going to get the proper understanding of what you're looking for. Whether it's a matter of outsourcing or selling, then, or just doing business in general, you need to go and see it, even if they speak your language.
Yeah, definitely a principle that I think is going to evolve, but the principle remains the same of that firsthand knowledge. Oliver, for all our listeners out there, was the best place for people to, one, thank you for the episode, and two, learn more about what you're doing and even get a copy of the book.
Absolutely. I hope everybody will go and get a copy of the book. I think it's a fun read. I hope it is. I've got some great initial reviews for it. So people seem to be very happy. They may not learn how to actually do business. I hope they'll get some inspiration on some ways of approaching things, and in particular, how enjoyable and how fulfilling international business travel can really be. Rael, thanks for the opportunity of talking to you today.
Thank you, Oliver. Hey, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor to be a small part in your journey. And if you found Oliver's story and lessons today useful and share-worthy, please consider sharing the episode to someone who you might find could benefit from it. You never know that you might be a catalyst of change for that person. If you have any podcast recommendations or questions or any topics that you'd like us to go deeper on, or if you just want to share your feedback on the show, you can email us at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. As always, this is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.